Hello and welcome again to the Rider Review. This is Eric Rutt Rider, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 1999 found footage horror film, The Blair Witch Project. Now, The Blair Witch Project ran for 81 minutes long. It is directed and edited by Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez. It is produced by Greg Hale and Robin Cowie. The score was done by Antonio Cora, and the cinematography by Neil Fredericks, and it stars Heather Donahue, Joshua Leonard, and Michael Williams. In the 1999 horror classic, The Blair Witch Project, we see three aspiring young filmmakers in October of 1996 set out on a journey to do a documentary based on a mysterious urban legend known simply as the Blair Witch, who resides in a forest outside of a small town called Burkittsville in Maryland, which was formerly once known as Blair. At first, we're given the impression that this film was based off of raw footage. I mean, the research going in this documentary is, well, pretty shoddy in execution. The camera is surely out of focus, and plus, Heather repeatedly utilizes ahas and yas when she's asking questions towards the residents of the area. The opening sequences will surely make you gnash your teeth in annoyance. In fact, the whole movie within a movie can be contrived at times. But once the young students enter the woods in search of the Blair Witch, the annoyance becomes more paranoid as the fears and the anxieties start to send chills down our spines. Of course, the locals in the area who claim to believe that the woods in Burkittsville is haunted, and these three protagonists are about to expect the unexpected. What will their search lead them to? Will it lead them to the truth? Will it lead them to success? Or will it lead them to something more dark and more dreary than even they could have ever expected? Fortunately, the real filmmakers, Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez, were not as inept as the student filmmakers. What we get is some believable settings as the determined crew makes their way into the Maryland forests, where they are lost and more trapped as they are in the labyrinth of trees and shrubs. And the more the adrenaline level goes up rapidly as the fears and paranoia become more and more overwhelming. The daytime scenes start off quite equivocal, and it's just as the twigs from the trees or on the ground snap can surely garner scares, where expect the unexpected becomes focal in our minds as much as theirs. The rock piles that bear a resemblance of grave markers epitomizes a sense of unsettling tension of the students, as though their eyes were playing tricks on them. These supernatural elements that the threesome faces would surely drive anyone insane. And if and just think about it. When you're roughing it in the woods, you don't know what's happening in the woods. It could be a pretty spooky place. And if there is no witch, there could be all kinds of other fears too. Such fears include, let's say there was a thunderstorm and a tree would fall on them. That could be scary. Or what about this story about this deranged guy by the name of Peston Carr, who was once accused of murdering 7 children? Or what about the whole story about Robin Weaver, a little girl who was lost in the woods, and then when she came back 3 days later, she told a local believed that she told her mother a story about a woman who levitates, which means that her feet never leave the ground. That's pretty scary in itself. You don't know what to expect in the forest. And of course, there's also the possibility of animals. And I don't think Heather, Josh, or Mike came with any kind of fighting equipment. No, they only came with camping gear. Enough food to may last them for 1 or 2 days. And then after that, where else could they go? Of course, this was in 1994. They didn't have any GPS systems or any kind of GPS systems on their smartphones because they didn't have those in those days. So the situations between, if they would have had them today, maybe they would have gotten out scot-free, but not back in 94. In 1994, if you were lost in the woods, you're pretty much fucked in the face. And that's what happened to Heather, Josh, and Mike. So, there was a lot of things for these three guys to fear about. Not just the witch, not just the witch herself. But I think the ultimate fear in this movie is just fear itself. And I will get to that, a little bit later on. The daytime fears seem pretty tame at first because the paranormal activity doesn't generate as much fear as the gang might shed some hope of finding their ways out of the woods if they could trace back to where they began their journey. But when night comes and when things go bump in the night, the fear factor really gets the boost. The strange sounds nearby can be chillingly frightful, and our brave but naive, unequipped students can do nothing but stick together. But by nightfall, the horror party finally gets tense, and the audience watching this can feel the level of fear that anyone sneaking up behind them in the theaters can get someone a cardiac arrest. The forest is black, the theater is dark, everything is painted black during these scenes. The main prop in this movie is the cheap first-person camcorder, which eventually becomes a character in the film itself, as we become a part of this movie, courtesy of the camera, as well as the terror the gang faces. It lingers on us, as well as we feel convinced that there must be a Blair Witch lurking in the forest. These camera traits show adults that it is normal that as human beings we are programmed to be scared of the dark, and there is nothing to be shameful about that. The lack of preparation when entering the woods, the students have been faced in a sort of predicament that they can't seem to get out of, and the more they struggle, the worse it gets. Who can ever forget that infamous scene when Heather is in a booger dripping stance, confesses that it was her stubborn ways and determination to finding the truth. She begs her cohorts, Josh and Michael, for forgiveness. We actually feel for her without the audience feeling manipulated. The Blair Witch Project is utilized as a staple on why we're obligated to watch and let alone produce films. When the student starts to get restless, hungry, and feared, Heather decides that now's the time to close the camera. Finally, the more restrained Joshua takes her camera and retaliates it by pointing it back at her and shouting back at her as though the camera rules her life while it affects the other two characters caught in the middle of the mess she put them in. In some ways, this movie helped actually spawn shows like Ghost Hunters, Ghost Adventures, In Search of, where paranormal experts go around the world to seek the truth in that if there really is life beyond our mortal lives. Now, a lot of people in the theaters were had very mixed feelings about this movie. Many people liked the movie because it opened up a whole new aura of movies of this magnitude, which led to stuff like Paranormal Activity, amongst a few other ones. And then there were, of course, the people who completely misunderstood the movie. These are the naysayers. The naysayers felt that they were cheated out. Maybe it was because they thought that they were going to see a Blair Witch. Well, I got news for you guys. There wasn't going to be a Blair Witch. Nope. And that actually is not entirely a bad thing. Because the Blair Witch was right here. The whole stories, the urban legends, and the stuff that made up is where the Blair Witch is just the figment of the mind. The fear in the forest is what's really the scare. And I think people were very, very upset about that. And I can understand. But there was never intended to be a Blair Witch. When they got in the house, you know, I mean, it all started with Josh's kidnapping, Heather and Michael going to the house. They see children's handprints on the wall, symbolic writing. That's enough to make anyone feel fearful. And I thought there was a lot of fearful things too, that we didn't necessarily need to see the witch. I mean, there were all kinds of things that were materializing. Like the stick figures, the rocks piled in certain areas. In Josh's bag, some translucent slime. They hear sounds like cackling and trees and twigs. I mean, stuff like this is enough to drive anyone insane. So, even if you never saw the witch, there was a lot of stuff here to be scared of. Sorry, I got a bit of a cold, so I'm going to be coughing a lot. Also, a lot of people said that the acting was bad. Well, I didn't think it was really that bad in terms of acting. I thought they were all very believable. I mean, the emotions that the three people faced when they were in the forest is about as real as they can get. I would probably feel the same way too if I was lost in the woods with very little equipment and enough stuff to keep me surviving for what was to be only for like a couple of days, which turned out to be much longer than we had expected. They didn't expect, they thought that maybe they would come out maybe in 1 or 2 days. They didn't know that the search was longer than they thought, and then they ended up being lost in the woods, only to meet their demise in the end. I think that really is believable. I would feel the same ways as these guys would. And if you think the acting is bad, did you know that if you check imdb.com and you look at type in the Blair Witch Project and in the trivia, did you know that many fans had sent in sympathy letters to Heather's mother regarding her death, when in reality Heather Donahue never died? These guys are just actors. And if they were able to convince fans that this whole thing was real, then that's what I call probably some of the best acting I have ever seen. So it wasn't really that bad of a movie. In fact, if I was to give this movie a scale out of 10, I would have to give it an 8. So I guess this ends my writer review. Thank you all for listening in. If you'd like to subscribe to my channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. But just remember, be kind, be courteous, and don't be rude. And I will be back again with another review. So until next time, this is Eric Writer saying, keep watching those movies, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.